Cool. Hey everybody. Shorts asked me if I could talk about esports, and this is a thing I've been fascinated by for a while now. And I thought, yes, I can talk about esports. In fact, I can talk for hours about esports, but I don't have hours right now, so I need to distill it a bit. And I see a lot of people playing these games, but I don't really see that many people who are eloquent about it from the design space talking about it. So a lot of the people who play esports are very juvenile. We'll come to that in a bit. So, and I thought that there is stuff here that's super interesting. It gives me a lot of interesting design ideas and interesting material to work with. And I think we should talk more about this. So as Zoraida said, we are the studio that does design for play. So we take a very liberal attitude to play and to games. And we have made a lot of games in the past. We still do make a lot of games, but actually we think games are just one way that we help people solve their problems. And that could be anything, really. But we've always been at the edge of what's considered games by all kinds of game people. So that's an odd space that we've been in. We've made local multiplayer games. This is for kids in a museum. They play a game together here, and by playing this game, they learn biology. So we thought that was pretty successful. The kids really enjoy this, and it's actually local multiplayer. So it's 2 versus 2 teams, and they're playing, and then they're using parts of animals. But talking about esports, I got into this a while back, and there's a bunch of them around, and I'm going to focus mostly on the one I got into, which is Dota 2, which may be known to... Who knows Dota 2 here? Who plays it? A handful of people, really. Okay, yeah. There's a bunch of them, like League of Legends, Heroes of New Earth. And essentially what Dota is, it's a game of rhythm. So it's 5 versus 5 people. It's commonly referred to as a multiplayer online battle arena. And people run around the map, killing each other, and killing these creeps in the middle. And what they're trying to do is be the last person who hits a creep before the creep dies. And that gives this odd dance-like rhythmic quality where you're trying to figure out when the exact right moment is to hit the creep, depending on your damage output and your attack delay, and on the other person's damage output and attack delay. And well, this is fairly high-level Dota. If this is actually puppy playing, that is like some of the best Dota in the world. But you can get here slowly in a sort of you can approach this level very slowly. So that's like one of the materials I want to talk about. Like rhythm is a huge topic in games. I'm not going to go into that right now. But one of the materials that this game employs is difficulty, punishing difficulty. And often this is not considered a good thing, but in fact it is a very good thing. It's both good in casual games. For instance, Flappy Bird is a very difficult game. And in casual games, difficulty is used to reduce the session length of a game, so you can play it a bit, and then you have replay value, because you can always get further. For non-casual games, like Dota, difficulty needs to be balanced with an incredible deepness. With the last International, the big Dota tournament, a friend of mine got into it for the first time, because they did a really good job. They made a newcomer stream where everybody would explain what was happening to new people, and he got into it, and he's like, holy shit. He said, this is even more baroque than I thought it was. It is so incredibly dense. There's so many rules happening in Dota, and nobody even knows all of them. There's 5 damage types. There's all kinds of minute rules that interplay with each other, and both the deepness and the length of the games, which I long thought the Dota game can take anywhere from 20 to 70 minutes. I thought that the length was a handicap. But actually, length in experiences adds to depth, adds to the memorableness. If you think about cricket games, the real cricket games take several days. And that makes people remember them. That makes people remember the certain events that happened during those 3 days. Even if most of the 3 days nothing happens, those couple events demarcated between all of this non-happening make for a huge dramatic load. So I think making a game that's punishing is interesting and is valuable, and that's interesting material to play with. Next up, team play. Dota was my first positive experience with team-based sports in general. I've never been a team sports player, and playing this has been interesting. And most games don't really have a team-like quality that I would consider team-like. Like team play only happens, I think, in real-time games when somebody else depends on you to do something in a time-constrained fashion. And like the real interesting interplay effects only happen when you go beyond two people. Like if you're playing Hokra with somebody else, it's nice. You're playing together. But if you're playing with 5 people, there's all kinds of strange stuff that can happen that's not ideal and which you have to fix together. So making games for more than 2 people, like 5 or a dozen people, is interesting, and it creates all kinds of other problems that you have to solve. And when it works, it's excellent. But I've played a bunch of local games that were festival-type games where leadership was an interesting question, and I haven't seen enough games that explore leadership as a material good enough. So I think leadership, and in Dota morale, that can all kinds of things can happen during the game that will influence the morale of your team, and your team will start hating each other, and then you will lose. If you can manage to go out of this dip and keep the morale high, there's always a chance for a comeback. So being able to be a leader in the moment, in a fluid, dynamic scape where you don't even know the other players usually, that's, I think, super interesting. And leadership is something, I think, that we should explore as game makers really way more often. Another thing that struck me as super interesting is builds and strategies. There's a talk by Henry Lowood about the overlap between sports and games and how the performative aspects work. What I think is interesting in these kind of games is there are builds. So you don't want to see the top of the screen, you want to see the bottom, where there's the skill points that have been put on skills and the items that have been bought by players. And the items have a certain value, and it's expensive to replace them. Like you can sell them and buy another one, but that's hugely expensive. Usually not going to do that. So any type of item you buy is a path that you've taken in, and it's a build. So you build your character. And what this does, which normal sports don't do as well, is it shows you what players are thinking. It shows you which strategy they are going to employ, what they can do. And if you deeply follow a real sport, you will notice, like, people know what players can do. People know what strategies are employed. But usually it takes a lot of work to make it displayable, to advertise it publicly. And in these kind of games, because it's disembodied, because you're seeing what the player is seeing, and you're seeing the same space, the strategies are made visible. And I think, for instance, real sports, if the players become quantified with sensors, could hit this level where you could actually see how much energy a player still has left. Like with Dota, you can see how much hit points people still have. But if you can see how much stamina a player has left during a football match, that could be super interesting. And I think making people commit to things and make it publicly visible could be interesting, because it gives you, besides game state, it gives you a view on the player state and what the players wants to do. Difficult topic here, flaming. This still gets me every time, because Dota is known for it being super abusive, and people will call each other all kinds of terrible things. And I have never really been called that many bad names regularly by other people. Flaming is also part of the culture where people troll. So most of the flaming costs the people who are flaming nothing, and they get an effect. And trolling happens up until the highest levels of play. So here is Dandy is telling somebody else that they can die. And Dandy is one of the world's best known players. So it's a really difficult topic, and flaming also kills morale. But I don't want to say that flaming is totally bad or that it should be totally enforced. And I've seen guides where people are talking about how you can flame for strategic effect. So if you call other people bad things, it can influence their gameplay. I've noticed it myself, and you can win because of that. So I don't think that's morally okay. But in sports type games, you see a lot of coarse language being used, because I think the emotions that happen during the heat of the moment are so strong that they get people to express themselves in that way. And I actually do believe that creating local games or board games or other type of games where people are really overtly antagonistic towards each other isn't explored a lot, for obvious reasons, but I think it's an interesting material to play with. The game I hate to play the most would be, for instance, diplomacy, where you actually start to hate other people. But still, it's a very valuable and important game, and I think you can explore this material further and see what you can do with that. Related to this is the topic of nicknames, where nicknames are, like in online games, it's a huge thing, of course. Like everybody uses a nickname, but I hadn't really realized in Dota, for instance, that I am the only person usually who has like an identifiable avatar picture in the game. Nobody else, except this one dude here, has like an actual photo of themselves. And I used to go in the game for a while using my actual name, Alper, and then I would get like a certain type of trolling by Turkish people who are common on Eastern European servers, and they would like troll me in Turkish. And I was like, okay, so I get why people have super unidentifiable nicknames. And I changed my name to Alpen instead of Alper. So I changed one letter where I'm not identifiable as a Turkish person anymore. So it shows you how real names are not necessarily good. And I also think it's super interesting that you see this type of stuff. The nicknames have been, when following the tournaments, have been nice because you just know who's meant when somebody says No Tail, who changed his name. And you also see this permeating into real sports now, where like real sports people will be known by a nickname. And I think I would like to see more of that. And nicknames, the identity creation there is interesting. A huge material in online esports has been live streaming, I think. And it's been created because most of these games are played on desktop, and it's sort of easy to live stream your experience because you're sitting there behind the desktop. And for local multiplayers, local multiplayer games, hybrid games, it's been super challenging to live stream those experiences. But I think it would be super, super valuable to do that. I bought Reflector this week. This is a way to stream a mobile device to your desktop. And you could use this, I think, to live stream an experience using the webcam. So, for instance, I like Glitch Tank a lot, but nobody knows about this game. And if you could like stream your player experience with somebody else while you also use the screen, I think that those kind of things could really help move the knowledge of these games forward. And in your design, it would be interesting if you think about this. So can you grab a cam, or can you attach this, or how can you use streaming as a medium that maybe is part of your game or maybe attaches to your game? I'm running short of time, but I'm almost done. Another thing that's big in Dota is cosmetics. You get these kind of cosmetic things you can buy, which are a huge business, and most talks about esports focus on the business aspect. But as a player who's invested in this game, it's super satisfying to use one of these objects on your character. It's really nice. And it has no impact on gameplay. So buying a super cool sword doesn't influence your gameplay at all. So you've got some customization happening in games where you can, for instance, do deck building. But I think doing cosmetic customizations in your games is a super interesting material that's also not explored a lot because we all use like very similar controllers. You can compare this to bike polo, which is where from an anti-capitalist point of view, people will always build their own things. So the bikes people use are usually self-built or self-sourced somewhere, and the mallets are definitely usually self-built, especially when this was more of an underground sport. So it was like more of a build-your-own lightsaber kind of sport. And I think that's interesting. So what kind of like folkish games can you make where people have to make their own things to be able to play? And whatever you bring shows a part of your personality and who you are to the other players. I think that's also super interesting. So I want to close off with like this talk could have been about any other thing as well. It could have been about Netrunner, or it could have been about Smash Brothers, it could have been about Minecraft. It's just that they're like these huge and deep spaces, and I would encourage you to like dive into one of them and see what kind of pearls you can bring back to us and play with and make stuff with. So that was it. Thanks.
No questions because you don't like questions. You're against questions. You told me once. You want to try one? Let's try one. Question. But if
There might be questions.
one.
Okay.
Better be good. You better be good. No pressure, but better be good.
Well, I don't think like local games where you have to punch people are super popular with certain people. And locally you've got a way bigger cost, a social cost to punching other people than online, of course. But it helps transfer an effect. So we made this game during a workshop where people had to shove other people. And you feel bad for shoving, you feel bad for being shoved, so it helps you create an emotional effect. And there was another mechanic in the game was hugging people. So if you make these kind of things part of your game, you create the emotional effects that are associated with them. So yeah, you have to be careful with it, but it's also very interesting material to play with.